Isn't it so frustrating that no matter how hard we try, how good the arguments are, how airtight the defense is for God or Jesus Christ being the Son of God, that people like Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, Alex O'Connor, the Cosmic Skeptic, or even Ben Shapiro, who's an Orthodox Jew, can at the end of the day just say...
So we can have the historical argument back and forth, obviously, and I think that there are arguments that you can make. I think there are arguments that I can make, but I honestly find them relatively uninteresting is the truth.
It can be so frustrating. The rest of us are like, oh my goodness, that's so clear. It's so obvious. Many times it seems like these people are kind of just like dodge and bob and weave bullets of rationality and reason. And so it's left me racking my brain thinking, is there a defense? Is there an argument? Is there something we could present to these people that would make them at the very least pause and say, that's interesting. Whether you're an atheist, agnostic, or even Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, I think the video you're about to watch is going to be extremely compelling. If you're a Christian, I encourage you to watch throughout the entire video, and I have a couple comments at the end I want to share. I think this is going to shift the tide in the war against skepticism. Let's watch.
The one that I investigated that absolutely blew me away the most was a woman by the name of Barbara Snyder. I interviewed Barbara at length. We have extensive medical records from her dating back many years from the Mayo Clinic and her other physicians. We have multiple credible eyewitnesses with no motive to deceive. We have two of her doctors who were so blown away by what happened to her, they wrote about it in books because they said, I got to write about this. This is unbelievable. So let me tell you what happened to Barbara. Barbara was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the Mayo Clinic. For the next several years, she just deteriorated, got worse and worse. She had repeated hospitalizations, repeated surgeries, until ultimately she was dying. And they put her in hospice at her home. So she's confined to bed at her home. One of her physicians, Dr. Harold P. Adolph, a board-certified surgeon who had performed 25,000 operations in his career, he called Barbara, quote, one of the most hopelessly ill patients I ever saw. Hopelessly ill. One of her lungs was non-functional. The other was just inflated at 50%. A tube was inserted into her neck and oxygen was pumped from canisters in her garage so she could breathe. She'd lost control of her urination and her bowels. She was legally blind. All she could see were gray shadows. A feeding tube was inserted into her stomach. She hadn't walked in like 7 years, and so her legs had atrophied. Her muscles had shrunken, and her legs atrophied. And she was curled up like a pretzel in her bed from her illness. Her hands were flexed so that her fingers were touching her wrists, and her feet were permanently flexed and extended. Her parents met with doctors, and they agreed there's nothing more medically that could be done. And they said the next time she contracts pneumonia, which because of her lung situation, she would contract it on a regular basis, they would not try to revive her because it would just prolong her inevitable death. Well, then one day, a friend, called WMBI, which is the radio station in Chicago that's run by the Moody Bible Institute, a Christian radio station. And they said, would you announce and just ask people to pray for Barbara? Barbara's on her deathbed. She's really suffering. Would you please have people pray? And we know that a minimum of 450 Christians began to pray for Barbara. How do we know? Because they sent letters telling Barbara, we're praying for you. So what happened? I'm going to let Barbara describe to you what happened next, to tell you herself what happened on Pentecost Sunday with her friends who came to her to read her some of these encouraging letters that the people who were praying for her had written to her. So let's watch Barbara.
June 7th, 1981, I'll never forget it. It was a day like any other day for me. That was one spent confined to bed, unable to breathe on my own, hooked up to machines, a tracheostomy tube in my neck, my arms curled up, my legs curled up. I lay there trapped inside my own body is really how it felt. I had 2 friends over. They came over all the time. They were from my church. My church family never forgot me. So while they were there, I still remember exactly what they were reading when all of a sudden I heard a booming, authoritative, loud voice over my shoulder over here say, "My child, get up and walk."
And there was nobody else in the room?
And there was no one else in the room, and the door was over here. There were windows over this way. And instantly, I knew it was God. But instantly, I also knew that my friends didn't hear that, which is kind of interesting, too.
Yeah.
And I needed to share with them what I heard. Well, I had this tracheostomy tube in my neck. That's how I breathed. And I had hands that did not work. So my friends said whenever I looked agitated, they knew I wanted to talk. So they'd come and plug the hole in my neck. And I said, "I don't know what you're going to think about this, but God just told me to get up and walk." And my friends got really quiet. I know, but he really did tell me to get up and walk. Run, get my family. I want them to be here. And my friends all of a sudden jumped up, and while they jumped, so did I. I was so excited I couldn't wait for anyone. And I literally jumped out of the bed. This is where you'd almost have to have known me to see how totally impossible that was. So this time, I remember reaching up and pulling my oxygen off my neck. I remember that. And then I jumped toward the voice. My friends are over here, but I jumped towards the voice. And as I jumped up, the first thing I remember isn't what I would think I would remember, but I jumped out of the bed and I looked and I saw my feet. They were flat on the ground, just like everyone else's, which sounds normal, but not for me. I had foot drops so badly I couldn't even wear slippers on my feet. They were so curled. So when I jumped up to have feet flat, I was amazed and stood staring at my feet. And when I did that, I jumped like this, and then I saw my hands. And they were open, and they never opened. And so now they were open, and I stood staring at them, and then it dawned on me I could see me. That's what I would have thought I would have noticed first, was my vision. But I didn't.
It was back, you could see.
It was back, I was perfectly fine. And I stood staring again for a little while, just feeling what it felt like to look at and see me. And then I turned, and that's when we were like women. We all started jumping up and down, screaming and thanking the Lord. I remember I didn't understand anything except where once I was real sick, I was well again. And it has to be God. That's all I knew.
Barbara was instantly and thoroughly healed. Her eyesight was immediately restored. Her lungs immediately went back to normal. Her mother came running into the room and fell to her knees and began to feel her calves. She said, "Your muscles are back." Her muscle tone had returned instantly to her legs so she could walk after 7 years. Her father came in and hugged her and then began waltzing with her around the room. Well, this was a Sunday that this happened, and there was a church service that night at her church, which was Wheaton Wesleyan Church in suburban Chicago. They were holding a service, and so at the point in the service, a pastor gets up and says, "Now, does anybody have any announcements they want to mention?" And with that, Barbara began to stroll down the aisle in front of everybody who had only known her for all these years as being curled up in a wheelchair or sick in bed. She comes strolling down the aisle, and the place erupts, and people begin singing, "Amazing Grace, I once was blind, and now I see." The next morning, she went to one of her doctors, Dr. Thomas Marshall, an internist for 30 years. And when he saw her walking toward him down the corridor, he said later, "My first reaction was, oh, she died and this is a ghost." That's the only way he could account for it. His response was this, quote, "This is medically impossible." Friends, God instantly and completely and astoundingly healed Barbara in one miraculous moment. There's no natural explanation for this. This was not some sort of spontaneous remission, which happens over a period of time, and the illness often comes back. This was instantaneous, her eyesight returning, her lungs reinflating, her entire body immediately healed. And how would you explain that voice telling her to get up and walk? This would be like a voice telling you, "Get up and fly." And you'd say, "Well, I can't do that." That's how wild it was for her say, get up and walk after all these years. And yet she heard that. How do you explain that? Well, the illness has never come back today. This happened more than 30 years ago. Today, Barbara is married to a pastor, and they have a little church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And one of her doctors wrote this, quote, I have never witnessed anything like this before or since, and considered it a rare privilege to observe the hand of God performing a true miracle.
Man, this is such a powerful testimony. So often in philosophical or even historical arguments, debates, conversations, people can wiggle their way out of, well, I just don't know. But there is no escaping, no wiggling out of what happens to Barbara. Oftentimes, we also hear the argument, well, it's just a little headache that gets healed, or it's just a little backache, or this or that. But in this case, it's a serious medical condition. Oftentimes, with the serious medical conditions, the stories of those will say, well, it's not corroborated. They never went and got checked up by the doctor. In this case, it's actually medically verified. In Lee Strobel's books, the person who wrote this book, Case for Miracles, he has documented many other medically verified miracles corroborated by medical professionals. We're going to be reviewing several of these on the channel because I honestly think this is the way forward. That evangelism was never meant to be pontificating philosophical thoughts. I am eternally grateful for the work of William Lane Craig and other people, Dr. Turek, others who have pioneered in this space, but I seriously think we are misguided in our approach. Yes, we need the pontification, the philosophy, but we also need a demonstration of power. Let me read to you a verse from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians. This is 1 Corinthians 2. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, announcing the mystery of God to you, I did not come with brilliance of speech or wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear and in much trembling. My speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but of a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith may not be based on human wisdom, but on God's power. If you look through the Gospels, through the New Testament, through the book of Acts, you will see a common theme. When the gospel is needing to break into a new area, it needs to break into unbelief or skepticism, the number one tool used by the apostles, used by Jesus Christ Himself, and all the disciples and the followers of the way was the simple one. It was signs, wonders, and miracles. Jesus says this shocking thing in John 14. He says, the one who believes in me will actually do the works that I do. And then he even takes it to another level. He says, and greater things will you do because I go to the Father in heaven. We obviously know this is talking about the sending of the Holy Spirit and Pentecost and the infilling of the believer. But Jesus has promised that there will be signs, wonders, and miracles in the earth, proclaiming His name. Why? It's for His glory. It's for the honor of His name. It is the infilling of the believer. These things have a deep spiritual meaning. Maybe we'll do a teaching on it later. But I'll say this, and I'll end with this. We know it from all these videos on YouTube of these apologists going to campuses and giving this great defense for the faith. And some maybe turn, but many say, uncompelling. Why? It's because anybody can deny an argument, but nobody argues with an empty wheelchair. Take a skeptic, place them in front of a miracle, a real miracle. And they are happening today. For the skeptic out there that you've never seen this and you're wondering whether maybe you're an atheist, agnostic, undecided, maybe you're an Orthodox Jew and you don't know if Jesus is the Son of God, you should ask yourself, yes, did Jesus really exist? One of the great ways you can ask yourself is the claims that Christ made. He makes this claim in John 14 that His followers would be able to do certain miraculous, supernatural things. Not on command, but it will be happening in their life from time to time. So here's a great way to debunk Christianity. Has there been supernatural, unexplained healings, things happening around Christians? Do the research for yourself. See if it's out there. For the believer watching this, it is time to start pursuing the miraculous. Not for a show, not for hand claps and applause, but so Christ Jesus can receive the reward of his suffering. That's what this is all about, that Christ would receive the reward of his suffering. I hope this blesses you. It's time to pursue the miraculous again. Bring it on the college campus. I love you guys. Have a great rest of your day. And I hope you like the new setup. I put some bookshelves in here to get a lot of my books out of storage and get them off some of the top shelves. It's still a work in progress. But thank you guys for subscribing, sticking around, liking. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.